Joining me live now for some analysis is Dr. Katy Brown. She's a researcher who focuses on far-right politics in Europe. Great to talk to you today. It has been the most extraordinary couple of days here in Paris. Zoom out a little for us. What is it that you make of what we're seeing? What's particularly struck you?
Well, I think it's quite easy to get bogged down in the drama of the situation, both within the Republicans Party and the extreme right. But I think we need to actually think about what this means in terms of the normalization of far right politics. So I think we need to move away from the strategies behind it and think about how this could further lend to the mainstreaming of exclusionary politics, with people at the sharp end of far right politics suffering the consequences the most. That's where the story really lies.
Well, let's talk a bit more about that then. The National Rally for years really have been trying to portray themselves as a mainstream party. Has what we've seen over the past few days, does that suggest to you that they've succeeded in that?
I mean, you can think about it in two ways. We've obviously seen this huge response to the Republicans joining forces with them, where there's almost this desire to maintain physical distance from the far right. Um, but actually, we've seen this level of normalization occur over many, many years. So while people are expressing outrage at it, we could view this as deeply hypocritical. So you had Macron saying that the decision of the Republicans was turning their back on the legacy of de Gaulle, Chirac, and Nicolas Sarkozy. But it's actually a continuation of this long process of normalizing far right politics. If you take Sarkozy as an example, back in 2007, he was saying that he was seeking out the Front National's electorate one by one. So we've hardly seen principled opposition from the mainstream in the past. So yes, we can view this as part of that process of mainstreaming, but we also need to view the key role played by mainstream parties in this process themselves.
Right, and of course we need to take opinion polling with a big grain of salt, but currently they do suggest that the National Rally, the party we're talking about here, could win the most seats in that election in just 3 weeks' time, although not necessarily enough for an absolute majority in Parliament. If that happens, how significant is that in your view?
Well, of course, it would be extremely significant from an electoral perspective. But I think, again, we need to think about what we've been witnessing over the past few years under Macron as well. With his immigration bill in January, the ban on the abaya in schools, we've seen classic far right politics be adopted within the mainstream in France. And this has been happening over a number of years. So, yes, of course, we must be concerned about these elections and what they mean should the RN do well. And this is a huge risk that Macron is taking, particularly for those who are at the sharp end of this politics. But we also need to be thinking about actual alternatives that don't push the same kinds of politics that the far right has done for many years.
Right, and when you talk about those who are at the sharp end of this kind of politics, tell us about the kinds of people that you're thinking of there. Who's going to be most impacted by the rise of the far right here?
Well, you can think about a number of minoritized communities. Obviously, a huge area for the far right is immigration, and that will be something that they are going to push in the build up to this. So people coming to France, also Muslims as well, with the attacks on Muslim women's rights, etc. So there are a huge number of groups that could be impacted by this, and I think we really need to maintain a focus on what it means for them, and think of alternatives that strive to combat these inequalities.
Just Just a final question for you then, speaking of alternatives. You may have seen what left-wing groups are trying to do here in France to build a kind of alliance ahead of that election. Do you think that's going to work? Is that going to provide the kind of buffer that you believe is needed now?
Look, this is a real opportunity to defeat the far right and the mainstream that has been enabling them for years. But it also requires change in the left too, where we need to see that real alternative put forward. They've spent far too long fighting the far right on their ground. If you think back to Francois Hollande's tenure in 2015, he attempted to allow the stripping of French citizenship from dual nationals who were convicted of terrorism. These are kinds of the classic areas that the far right likes to battle on. So I think we need to see them speak to people's everyday concerns that they experience in their day-to-day lives, and not fight the far right on the ground that it wants to be fighting on.
Katy Brown, great to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.